November advisor webinar. Yet again, we try to do these every month just to help advisors keep up to date on different happenings in the fraternity, different resources that are available to them, anything new that's coming down the pike. Very exciting to have Doug Russell with us this evening. Doug is our Assistant Director of Leadership. He's going to be talking about some new resources that will be coming online very shortly, within the next few days to next week, that will assist with officer transitions and officer training. I realize that many of you are right in that process right now. Elections are probably going on as we speak, and now is that time to where the old executive board, the old administrative board is looking to quickly get out, but we want to make sure that they are able to, the new executive board, it doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, that there's a smooth transition, and that the new officers get training so they know what's expected of them and the deadlines and everything of that nature. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the expert on this topic. And so I would like to introduce Mr. Doug Russell. And Doug, it's all yours.
Thanks, Alan. And I would use the term expert very loosely, but I will do my best. I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about a pet project of mine for the past 6-7 months that I've been working on, and this is really the first time that I've really been able to share it and get some feedback, and so I appreciate you all being here tonight. So where a lot of this information started was a part of the strategic plan. As part of the plan, staff, undergraduate members, and some volunteers have been examining some ways to expand opportunities to educate chapter officers and advisors. To start this process, over 150 chapter officers were surveyed on the opportunities the fraternity is currently offering to train its chapter officers. And what was found was there are 3 major areas that undergraduates are getting their information on how to be an effective officer. We found that over 70% had gone online to access their officer manuals. The division conferences are utilized as a major component for the majority of officers. And the chapter consultants are providing valuable insight to helping triage issues officers are dealing with and helping us enhance our current chapter operations.
Tony Hilton.
Hey, Tony.
Hey.
So we were just touching on some the new resources that we're going for officer transitions and kind of reviewing where we're at. We've mentioned that we've got some online manuals where the division conferences and the consultant visits is kind of where the state of the organization is at right now.
I'm trying to get on the web, but I'm not having any luck at all.
Okay. Well, hopefully, at least for right now, the words of wisdom that I've got, maybe those will help you out a little bit.
Okay.
But we're learning a larger portion of our undergraduate officers were going online to access the information to their position. The 70% of officers that had gone online to view their officer manuals was a little surprising for us. And so from there, a priority was placed on updating our officer manuals. Staff has spent the past 7 months revising, updating, and redesigning the content in the manuals to make them relevant for the 2014 officer, and we gave them a consistent look and message. From there, a focus group of 8 undergraduate members was put together. This focus group participated in conference calls assessing the information that was gathered from the initial survey and also reviewed the updated manual content. What we gathered from the focus group was the messages given in our main areas of officer education do tend to vary. If a chapter has an educated chapter advisor, they can play an invaluable resource. The transition between officers is a key element in the officer education, but is not done consistently throughout the organization. And the focus group was also interested in exploring a certification process for officers. With this information provided to the staff, they developed an officer training guide that will be provided to officers on Delta Connect starting December 1st. We're going to take a look and review what this process will look like. Are there any questions up until this point?
No.
Okay. This officer transition guide will be a 3-part guide to help chapter officers organize their time prior to taking office and utilize the invaluable resources and allies that the fraternity offers as the year progresses. They should note that this will not answer every question that every officer has. Obviously, no 2 school years are identical, and in turn, they and their team of officers will be presented with new problems and issues. This guide should, however, provide a standard process with educating the chapter officers. They should not have to reinvent the wheel every election cycle. It will be divided into 3 different sections. Each section will focus on an integral part of the training process. A checklist will be provided in every section to accomplish this. Taking advantage of each section will be important to maximizing the potential of the officer. These sections will consist of: the first will focus on the time from when the officer is elected to when he holds office. We'll look at really utilizing the division conference and maximizing their effort, and also looking at maximizing the chapter consultant visit as well. And the thought was to standardize the process and what happens in each of these processes, and to make sure that there was a consistent message in all 3. I do think it's important to note that the chapter advisor will still play a role here. He is the connection between each of these pieces and should help the chapter officers with any questions he may have when going through the training process. So now we're going to take a look at each of these sections individually. The first section will look at the officer's time from being elected until he takes office. This section will require the chapter officer to be self-motivated. Just as any team must be ready for its first game or event, the team of officers must have some knowledge before they begin their time in their respective roles. This will also be the most in-depth section for them. The first item the officer should accomplish is reading the entire officer manual and other resources online. This does seem fairly obvious, but it is important to make sure the officer completes this step. The officer manuals are the basis for every other step in this guide. They contain the minimum amount of information each officer should know. While the goal should not be for them to memorize each page word for word, they should be familiar with the concepts. Once they have read through the information, they can use these manuals as a resource to refer to as their term progresses. Excuse me. Starting on December 1st, the updated manuals will be found in DocuShare on Delts Connect. Next, the officer should meet with the outgoing officer for that position. These men have the most immediate knowledge of the position in the chapter. They will be able to provide the biggest insights to what works well and what are challenges they should be prepared for. They should take the officer manual and go through it with the outgoing officer. It should be important to note that if the incoming officer is receiving contradictory information from the outgoing officer with some of the information that is in the officer manual, the chapter advisor should be utilized as a resource to clarify the conflicting information. That will help if the outgoing officer obviously isn't necessarily providing the best advice, or if there's information that would need to be revised in the manual, that would be good for the advisor to know, so either the officer or the advisor can let the office know. In the officer training guide, there will be a questionnaire provided for each of the incoming and the outgoing officers to help guide their conversation. And for positions like the president, the vice president, and the treasurer, it is encouraged that the chapter advisor help facilitate that conversation since there is so much content there. In addition to meeting the outgoing officer, the incoming and outgoing executive boards should hold a transitional meeting or retreat. This may be one of the most crucial aspects of the officer transition process. Both outgoing and incoming officers should meet to discuss where the chapter has been in the past 12 months and discuss where the chapter wants to go. Identifying an annual purpose for the chapter will help give all areas of chapter operations some direction. More importantly, it makes sure all officers and chairmen are moving in a cohesive direction. A retreat outline will be provided in the guide. This retreat was developed from curriculum from past presidents and advisors retreats and input from experienced volunteers and campus professionals. Chapter presidents are encouraged to not actually facilitate this retreat. They should take part in the experience. They should consider asking the chapter advisor, campus fraternity and sorority advisor, or another professional or volunteer. This transition retreat should happen after the chapter's held its elections in the fall, but before everyone leaves for the semester break. It is important to reserve an appropriate space in advance, and this should be done outside of the chapter shelter to provide a work environment. During the transition retreat or meeting with the incoming and outgoing officers, the incoming officers should also create 3 SMART goals. As important as it is for the chapter to have a vision of where it wants to go, the chapter officer must also have a vision for himself. A SMART goal worksheet will also be provided in the officer training guide. Finally, for this section, from the intrigue the focus group had on the certification process for officers, an officer test was created at the end of every manual. Because there is no formal certification process currently for the fraternity, passing this test is not mandatory to take office. It is suggested, however, the officer should take the test on his own and be able to pass it with a minimum score of an 80%. So I just threw out a lot of information to you all. Are there any questions on this first section?
Yeah, I do. This is Tony Hilton. We have a committee structure set up for each of our officers and primary functions, and hopefully we'll be able to have some type of structured advancement or where the officers would move off of that committee and have some knowledge of what they're about before they actually take the office. Does that sound like something that would fit into this whole procedure you're talking about?
I think so, and this specific guide will focus strictly on the process from when they're elected till.
Right.
But I mean, we would definitely encourage the use of the committee system, and so during the year, the chairman doesn't have all the work on his shoulders, but the committee system, like you mentioned, is a really strong way to prepare your officers for taking office, especially for a position like a treasurer. Having an assistant treasurer is vital to their success because there's so much input there. So I definitely think that has a place and would be encouraged.
I think our officers will be in the colony will be serving, since we just started in October, probably would go to next year, keeping the same officers. Is that correct?
That would be typically that is what happens with colonies, and I would think that is if you. And I'm sorry, what colony are you with, Tony?
Gamma Delta, West Virginia.
Okay, yeah, I would say they probably would continue to hold those throughout the whole first year.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good group.
But I would
add, I heard good things from the colony, so I'm excited to see what they'll do.
And I would just add that even though they did have some specific officer training with the consultant, that these workbooks are still going to be a great resource for them as they're still during their position.
Well, I think
when are these workbooks available?
They will be available December 1st. We're in the final designing stages of it. We're putting the final touches on. Our goal when we started this process was to have it available for the newly elected officers. And they will be in the DocuShare of Delts Connect.
Okay.
And how are you going to let the officers know that they're there? What kind of marketing are we going to do for the undergraduates or the advisors that are not on this call?
That's a good question. So we are still in the process of putting together the marketing plan for this. There will definitely be a strong social media aspect of this. Email is the easiest way to reach all of them. Now, granted, whether they open that email is still to be seen, but there will definitely be a social media process, push with this. We'll also talk about it at the conferences this year. Hopefully, they will have been exposed to this at some point, but with it being so new, we're realistic to know that not every chapter will have seen it at that point. So we'll talk about it again at the conferences.
Hey, Doug, there's another question on the manual. Will there be a tracking mechanism or something that tells us when a person has accessed the manual so that maybe as a chapter advisor we could follow up with them knowing that they've already looked at it?
That's a really good question. As of right now, to my knowledge, there will not be a way to do that. That is something that I can follow up with Jack Creeman, who is kind of our Delts Connect czar. But to my knowledge, I don't believe we'll have a tracking mechanism.
Well,
yet.
maybe for the future then.
Yeah, that could and I don't know what all Delts Connect's capabilities are, but I think that could be something interesting to looking into.
And I do know that, that we're starting to look into an LMS system, so a learning management system, and that we would be able to see when they accessed it. We'd able to look at their quiz scores, but that is still probably a year away.
And I think one thing to know too, as the advisor, hopefully, if the advisor is engaged, they're going to know whether or not their chapter is planning that transition retreat, because we know that that's probably going to happen sometime between mid-November and the end of the semester, and and hopefully we'll be hearing at the executive meetings whether people are setting goals and things like that. And if you're not hearing those things as the advisors, I would definitely encourage you to check with your executive board, check with your president. The president is probably the one that would be planning the logistics, especially the outgoing president at that time, with planning that retreat and that type of thing. Okay. Any other questions on the first section? All right. So the second section will focus on utilizing the division conferences. We all know that they are a great resource to hone and sharpen the skills of chapter officers. They should not, however, be the first time the officer is seeing or hearing the main issues related to his position. Having a basis of knowledge prior to attending will help the discussions at the conference. The conference is a time to share new ideas with brothers from other chapters, refresh on key concepts as they relate to the position, and better understand how the chapter can improve. In this section, the chapter officer should complete the following. Finish all portions of Part 1 prior to attending the conference. Because the division conferences do not take place prior to the men taking office, they should have some knowledge coming in. If they wait 2 months to learn about the position, more than likely the chapter is already behind in what it should be accomplishing for the year. They should attend all the sessions related to or suggested for that position. The division conferences are meant to be a fun experience. It provides brothers from all over the country an opportunity to meet one another and enjoy the brotherhood. They are also, however, one of the few times members have to learn about new initiatives the fraternity is offering. It provides in-depth training for complex positions and provide chapters the opportunity to ask questions face-to-face with representatives from the central office and Arch chapter. Missing out on any of these sessions directly or indirectly related to the position can cause not only the officer, but the chapter to miss out on important information. Every officer should discuss his position and trade best practices with a minimum of 2 other chapters. Every year, men walk away from the division conferences wishing they had more time to trade ideas with one another. These conversations can happen within a breakout session, but they can also happen over a meal or in the hotel lobby. Making sure the officer is effectively utilizing this time is important to getting all the information he needs throughout the 2 to 3 days of the conference. He should make sure he writes down and records this information. He should also know some ideas he may receive from other chapters may be acceptable on those campuses, but he should always check with his own Greek advisor to make sure those practices are appropriate for his campus as well. In addition, he should always compare ideas he receives at the division conference to the mission and values of the fraternity. If they do not coincide with one another, the idea may or may not be necessary to implement in his chapter. In the officer training guide, there will be a worksheet every officer can use to record his ideas he gets from other chapters and take their contact information. Finally, all chapter officers should complete the conference action plan to implement information learned from the conference. Retaining all the information provided at the division conference can be like drinking water from a fire hose. If the information is not written down and logged, a lot of this can be forgotten. Make sure as the officer progresses throughout the conference, he should write information down, but then more importantly, it should be put into a plan of action to implement when he returns to campus. Receiving knowledge and information can become unproductive if it is not effectively utilized. The officer guide will have a copy of the conference action plan, and it will also be provided during the final chapter planning sessions at the conference. Are there any questions over the second section of the officer training guide?
Doug, would you encourage advisors to sit down with those that attended the conference shortly after and kind of review, or how should the advisor get engaged in that process?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely a benefit for the advisor to sit down with the chapter before and review this checklist almost, and then after, if he didn't attend the conference with them, to definitely check in with them when they return. And just that way, especially speaking before, I think it sets a tone of, while yes, this is a brotherhood event and this is a fun experience, this is a great way to network, it also is a business trip as well. And let's make sure that we're using this experience to help push our chapter forward. Any other questions? Okay. So we will move on to the final portion. The final portion of this guide will focus on the chapter consultant visit. Unlike the division conferences, the consultant visit is the officer's time for one-on-one attention. Questions specific to the chapter needs can be addressed by the consultant. These men are trained in every aspect of the organization. They are not there to get the chapter in trouble. Having open and honest conversations with the consultant will allow the officer to get a fresh perspective from outside the campus community. Because each chapter gets a visit from the consultant at various points throughout the semester, the direction of the conversation could change, depending on the time of the year the consultant visits. While the consultant is there for the officer as resources, the officer should also take responsibility and come prepared to his meeting. The following should be done during the consultant visit. The consultant will have some information he will need to get for the sole purposes of record keeping. The officer should be prepared to answer the consultant's questions. To have an idea of what the consultant will need, the officer can review the chapter consultant report from the previous visit. The officer should also review his 3 SMART goals he developed at the beginning of his term with the consultant. He can provide guidance on how to achieve the goal or help him establish new goals if he has already accomplished the task. Every officer should also come to the meeting with the consultant with 3 questions or issues he would like to get the consultant's feedback on. This could pertain to his position or just to generic chapter operations. While everything may be going well in the chapter, this is also an opportunity to enhance what the chapter already has in place. They should also complete a post-consultant meeting follow-up plan to implement suggestions or items discussed with the consultant. Every visit from the consultant should help move the chapter forward. He can provide feedback and ideas, but most of the time he will not still be with the chapter when it comes time to implement change. Either during the meeting with the consultant or soon after, the officer should complete a follow-up plan. Some of the consultant's suggestions may seem daunting to put into action, but once the officer begins to map out the course, it can become easier to see how the goal can be achieved. A consultant follow-up plan worksheet will be provided in the officer training guide. Finally, the officer should continue to utilize the consultant as a resource as the semester progresses. During the officer's meeting with the consultant, he should get his contact information to use down the road. Are there any questions on this third and final portion of the officer training guide?
I guess my question would go back to how can the advisor impact this part of the guide? I know that most advisors will have a one-on-one meeting with the consultant, but should they do that at the end of the visit to where they can review all of the goals, or should they do it at the beginning of the visit so that they can kind of address what they see as issues and the consultant can help them resolve it, or should they meet at both the beginning and the end? How would you recommend an advisor be engaged in this part of the process?
I think, again, like the division conference portion, the advisor has a key role in setting the tone prior to the visit. I think it's important to mention that the consultant is not there to get them in trouble, that it's important to have open and honest conversations, because if we're not having authentic conversations with the consultant and vice versa, then real work won't necessarily be getting done during the visit. I think also it's important to realize these sections are in an order for a reason. The majority of officers will be newly elected right before the division conferences, so it's up to him to do his prep work. They will then the majority of the chapters will have a consultant visit after the division conferences. So there should be a flow in the SMART goals and reviewing them that they set at the beginning of their term. Hopefully some of those may have been accomplished or we're on the way to accomplishing them. So I think reviewing those goals will be important as well with the advisor. I don't think it necessarily has to be a one-on-one sit-down, but when you're in that executive board meeting or you're in the chapter meeting and you're having discussions, preparing the chapter for the consultant visit, I think those are important things to point out.
Doug, this is Matt. I just have a question on the SMART goals. Do they set those at the division conference, or do they set them at the beginning of the term and then retreat? I'm just trying to think through. I think our consultant, Graham's coming out prior to our division conference, and so I'm just trying to figure out the flow. If we have the new officers set those SMART goals during the retreat at the beginning of the semester, or would they have already done that, or what? Where would those fit in?
Ideally, they're doing that prior to taking office. Okay. And again, because the consultant visits will vary in the time of the year, Graham, coming this soon, could help your officers flesh out those SMART goals. Especially with the whole concept of a SMART goal and making a realistic goal, an achievable and a measurable goal, they may not have done that process before. And so the consultant should be able to help him review those goals and make sure that we're not, the academic chair isn't just saying, I want to raise the chapter's GPA. He's putting a specific number or specific ways that he wants to raise the chapter GPA.
Perfect. Okay.
So I think, again, it depends on when the consultant comes, but the majority of people should do it at that, prior to taking office.
Okay.
Good question. Any other questions? Okay. Now, while these components and the officer training guide will offer nuts and bolts training for officers and insight into how the transition process for outgoing and incoming officers will work, there are still some more resources for these men to develop their basic skills as a leader. Last year, as many of you know, the fraternity began implementing a 4-step process for the leadership development programs that are being offered on a national scale. While these experiences do not provide specific information about how to hold an officer position, they do provide a chance for men to develop their basic leadership skills. The first step in this process is Ignite. Ignite is focused on men who have joined Delta Tau Delta within the past 12 months. It is an opportunity to see the fraternity on a national scale. Ignite is a weekend experience in a camp setting that focuses on developing these 3 areas. The first would be affinity for the national organization. The second would be identifying what the participant wants his legacy to be as an undergraduate member. And then the third would be focusing on identifying the values of the fraternity and how the participant can use them in his role as a leader. To sum those up, we're measuring affinity, we're going to measure what his legacy is, and we're going to focus on the values congruence between his personal values and the fraternity's values. After Ignite was over this year, we found 100% of participants were able to develop, articulate, and share a statement of belief based on Delta Tau Delta values. We found that 93% of participants believe they could play a role in the success of their chapter regardless of having a position. Also, prior to attending Ignite, none of the participants were actually able to identify the 6 main duties in the Rite of Iris. But after the experience was over, 76% could do so and also relate it to a basic leadership development model. We are now in the process of also gathering information on the impact these students are making in their chapter, but we have found out that some of the men who attended Ignite this past year have recently been elected as their chapter president, treasurer, secretary, and risk manager. During the spring semester, we look to collect more exact information to provide advisors and potential participants on the effect of Ignite. I know that here on the call we've got a couple of people that facilitated Ignite sessions last year. We may have some others that may have just had some people in their chapter go to Ignite. Would anybody like to talk about the experience, whether you were there or talk about anything that they noticed and their participants that attended Ignite?
Doug, this is Randy at Beta Zeta, Indianapolis. We had 3 guys attend Ignite. One of them was elected president. One of them ran for 3 offices but was not elected. And the third chose not to run for executive office. But all 3 gentlemen really came back from Ignite fired up, excited about changing the fraternity, excited about leading on their admin committees, and it was just a great experience. And I have to say that for me, I was there as a facilitator. It's probably one of the best weekends I've ever had serving the fraternity. It was just a religious experience, and I would encourage all the advisors to go if they can and to send their students.
Agreed there, Randy. This is Matt out Theta Omega at Northern Arizona University, and I was one of the facilitators along with Randy actually in the session 1, and it was outstanding. It was unique in a way. Just to add, we didn't send any active members from our chapter, but I can tell you that the gentlemen that were there, the undergraduates, they experienced the opportunity to be away from sort of the minutia of chapter operations for a weekend and got to focus on the fraternity and the values. And I think they walked away with just sort of a bigger meaning of what it means to be a Delta, and really were able to take that back, align it with their personal values and the fraternity values, and take it back to their chapters, and clearly sort of ignited, in a way, I'll use the term, to have them, really be leaders in their chapter, it sounds like. So I think it's a definitely excellent program put on, and of course Doug was a big part of that.
Yeah, and another thing that I'll add to this is, we're finding that I know a lot of chapters like to send a large contingency to the division conferences, and I will always encourage anyone that wants to attend a division conference to go. I do know that sometimes the cost can be a burden to get some people there. The nice thing about Ignite is that this year the registration cost will only be $99 per person. And so we will have 3 different sessions this summer that we will offer to hopefully help the ease of travel for some of those for some of those people, and hopefully provide a cost-effective way to provide a leadership experience. So while this doesn't necessarily teach someone how to be an officer, it does teach them and begin to discuss the concept of what does it mean to be a leader in Delta Tau Delta. Anyone have any questions on Ignite or or want to know anything else about the experience?
Where will those 3 sites be?
That's a good question. This summer, the fraternity will offer 3 sessions of Ignite. The first session will happen in Kentucky in the Louisville area from May 30th to June 1st. The second session will take place in Texas in the Dallas area from June 6th to June 8th. And the final session will happen in California in the LA and Santa Barbara area from August 8th to August 10th. The thought process on these 3 sessions, Kentucky will pull hopefully from chapters that sent people from last year to continue that excitement that the participants saw by sending people last year. It's a good in-between place from Indiana and Atlanta where we had it last year. And then Texas and California are new areas that we can go to expose new men to this great experience that the fraternity has offered.
What do you expect the total cost to be?
The cost of going would be the registration fee is $99. That covers the registration fee, their lodging, their food, all of that while they're there. Now the travel expenses would be on their own, or the chapter would have to help them pay for that. And that's going to depend obviously on the person's distance. Ideally, as we grow this program, we'd like to make it drivable for the majority of our students, so a flight wouldn't be necessary. But so that it's $99 for the registration, and then plus the travel costs, depending on where the chapter's from. That's just going to vary some.
Wow. Is there a limit on how many a chapter can send?
As of right now, there isn't necessarily a limit. We do want to be cognizant of if, let's say, we have 50 spots, and a large chapter wants to send 20 people, that would change the dynamic of the session. And if we had a large contingency at one session, and one chapter wanted to send maybe like half the participants, we'd probably try to talk to that chapter about identifying certain individuals to send. But my hope and my goal is that we don't have to do that, and that we can offer to who wants to come.
That's a heck of a price.
That's what I agree, and I think that that was definitely a strategic goal when we developed these new experiences, was that we wanted to make it affordable for people to go. Any other questions? Okay.
Doug, this is Randy.
Uh-huh.
On the division conferences, who do you recommend attend from the chapter? Are the conferences geared to officers only or to everybody?
That's a good question. And like I said, I would never discourage anyone from coming to the division conferences. This year it is really focused on a lot of officer training. The concept this year for the division conferences is that it is all based around the FAR. The theme for the division conferences is the pursuit of excellence. So we've taken the measurement the fraternity uses to measure excellence and designed the curriculum all around that. So it will be very heavily focused towards chapter operations and officer training. Now, a first-year student, this could be a good opportunity for him to learn how a chapter works. But again, he should just know going into it, it will be focused on specific chapter operations. Okay. So that first step in our leadership process is focused on men that have joined within the past year. The second step is focused more on officer-specific information. It includes the division conferences that Randy just that asked about, and it also includes the president and advisors retreat. The division conferences we've touched on a lot on this webinar already, and like Randy, that was a great question too on who should attend. But the Presidents and Advisors Retreat is something we haven't talked about yet. It is a weekend experience designed to cultivate and develop a stronger relationship between the chapter president and the advisor. The two representatives from 20 chapters annually convene at the Fishers-Nichols headquarters here in Fishers, Indiana. Throughout this experience, the two will assess areas of chapter operations and begin to plan for the upcoming school year. The registration cost for this retreat is $100. This is actually the most affordable program the fraternity puts on. This $100 includes all expenses, including the travel, for both the president and the advisor. Like I said, this is by far the most economical experience, and one can have one of the most impacts on probably the most important relationship in the undergraduate chapter. I know we've had a few past attendees at PAR. Does anybody have any questions on that, or want to say something about how they've experienced the Presidents and Advisors Retreat in the past? Okay, I would say that I've participated as a chapter president, and also facilitated as participated as a facilitator. And I would say, as a chapter president, for me personally, I came with my division vice president, Lee Grace, who happens to be the Southern Division president now. And the relationship that we formed there, I began to utilize him as a resource in addition to my chapter advisor, because unfortunately he wasn't able to attend. But we were able to definitely, like I said, cultivate that relationship that I would not have had with Lee other than this experience. This year, like I said, it will happen here at the headquarters, and it will happen May 16th through the 18th. Okay. The third step consists of, again, another familiar program with attending Carnia, and also the Undergraduate Interfraternal Institute, also known as UIFI. Like the division conferences, most of us are familiar with Carnia. But UIFI, however, is an experience not as many members are familiar with. Like its name insinuates, UIFI is an interfraternal experience. It is a 5-day institute put on by the North American Interfraternity Conference that brings together fraternity men and women from across North America to create opportunities to explore, define, and enhance their leadership skills, personal awareness, commitment to their fraternity or sorority, and grow to expect values-based action from themselves and those they lead. This is a program Delta Tau Delta, to put more of an emphasis on, has doubled the amount of scholarships it will be providing in 2014. There are numerous sessions of UIFI offered throughout the summer that make it easier for participants to fit into their schedules. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this program. I've been able to facilitate this in the past as well. And this is almost an extension of the concepts that we're talking about at Ignite. We actually worked with the NIC to help us develop Ignite, but the UIFI will expand on those concepts and even begin to create more of a sense of the interfraternal bond between organizations. So in this step, while there's two portions of it, there's developing a sense of the Greek community, but then also by attending Carnia, you are seeing Delta Tau Delta on a national scale, and you're stepping outside of your chapter as a DELT and seeing Delta Tau Delta as a national organization as well. Does anyone have any questions on this step in the leadership development process? Okay.
How many scholarships are there, and how would they apply?
So I would say this year there are 10 scholarships available. If they are interested, I would encourage them to contact myself or Ellen Schertzer, our Director of Leadership Development, and we will be able to point them in the right direction. In the past, they've applied through the fraternity. I'll be honest, we're deciding whether they're going to do that or just apply through the NIC this year. So if you have an interested member, especially for those that have attended Ignite, I would encourage them to look at UIFI as well, but have them contact myself or Ellen. Okay? All right. And our final experience is our capstone experience. This is the charge. The charge is focused on engaging members going into their senior year or their junior year with significant leadership experience. I'm sure we have all seen in our times working with chapters that sometimes, all too often, these members can become disengaged from chapter operations. The charge focuses on keeping these men involved throughout graduation and beyond. It focuses on developing 3 key areas: the participant's remaining journey as an undergraduate chapter member, the participant's journey as a lifelong member in Delta Tau Delta, and the participant's journey as a global citizen of the world. We could sum those up by saying their chapter journey, their lifelong Delta Tau Delta journey, and then my future journey as the third one. After the charge was over, we found that 77% of participants stated that they had an action plan to take back to their campus to create positive change. 54% of participants demonstrated an understanding of the concept, as you advance, remember that others will follow. And 100% of our participants felt they experienced the difference between socioeconomical classes during the charge. Like Ignite, we will be measuring the impact these individuals are having back on their campus. But some of the best feedback we have received so far has come through social media. One of the participants really posted, and I got his permission to use his posting because I think that it showed what the charge can do for the participant in the chapter and outside. But he said, I used the $100 challenge we had during the charge as an example of a time I had to overcome a challenge with a team during an interview for an internship the other day. They were very impressed with not only what our group had come up with, but with the idea in general. Just another reason why the charge was so awesome. And the concept of the charge is for those of you that have seen the show The Apprentice, we give them different challenges throughout the week to utilize the skills that they have developed in their time as an undergraduate leader in their chapter and begin to put them into real-life situations so that they can have those conversations when they go into the job interview to talk about how their fraternity skills are relevant to a job they're applying for. This summer, there will be another 5-day session of the charge. It will happen from June 24th through June 28th, and we will be returning to Loyola Chicago University in Chicago, Illinois. I don't know if there's anyone in the call. Has anyone in the call had someone in their chapter go through the charge this summer? And if so, how have you seen where he's been able to utilize this experience at all? Okay. This past year, we only had 40 participants participate, which was actually an increase from our previous experiences that we had. We look to grow the charge this year by another 20 participants. What I would say is we have noticed that some participants really took this back to their campus and began to have conversations outside of their chapter, and how can they enhance not only their Greek community, but their campus community as a whole, which I think can also help improve the image of Delta Tau Delta on the campus. While the nuts and bolts training is essential for an officer to hold a specific job, taking advantage of these opportunities that I just went over are equally as important to developing that well-rounded leader in our chapters. I guess at this point I would really throw out a lot of information to you all. Are there any other thoughts, questions, suggestions on either the leadership development programs or the officer training guide that I talked about at the beginning of this webinar?
What's the cost of the charge?
That's a good question. The charge is $109. Still pretty economical. We realize that because this is only one location, a lot of participants will be flying. They will be responsible for their own travel. But one of the reasons outside of the curriculum that we chose Chicago is that it's a pretty economical city to fly into, that you actually have two options of an airport to choose from. So it's, again, it's a pretty economical experience as well.
Are there additional questions about officer transitions or officer training or leadership development? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, hearing none, then we will go ahead and wrap up this call. I want to thank everybody for attending, and especially want to send a big thank you out to Doug for facilitating this event. Hopefully you are able to take back some nuggets of information that will help you over the next month or so as you are transitioning officers and executive boards and administrative boards and everything of the like. Just a reminder that we do not have a conference call in December. We will be taking that time off as school is normally out of the session, and also just all the holiday parties and get-togethers. So we'll respect your time in December. We will be meeting again January 21st. And then also just a plug for our division conferences. Registration is open, so undergraduates and yourself can go online and register for division conferences, get your hotel rooms booked, and then start that planning process. I know a lot of people register right after elections, so get their new executive board in attendance to the division conferences, but just know that registration is open, and we'd encourage everybody to start that registration process. And you can get to the registration site from the delts.org. Up in the top right-hand corner, there's a little link that says events. I think it says events, something of that in the top right-hand corner. It will list all the division conferences. You just pick on your division. It'll send you right to the registration page. But with that being said, thank you everybody for attending. I will stay on for a few minutes if anybody has additional questions that they have outside of officer training or transitions. But if there are nothing else from the group, then have a happy Thanksgiving and happy holiday season, and we'll see you in January.
Cool. Thanks, guys.